Good evening. It's been 28 hours now since the announcement of the death of the Queen. For many, the rhythm of normal activity today has been affected by a sense of loss, of change and of history. And all that against the backdrop of the machinery of royal succession. This afternoon there were shouts of "God save the King" as King Charles III returned to Buckingham Palace as head of state. Tonight we'll take stock of the long life and legacy of the Queen, and we'll speak to two of those at her right-hand side during some of the country's most difficult periods. And we'll look at what the end of this chapter of history and the beginning of the next means for you, our country's identity, the Commonwealth and the world. First, the modesty and discretion, which were defining features of the life of the Queen, means that rarely during her reign did we actually hear her speak about the things that concerned her. So, after a day in which so much has been said about her, tonight we open with an insight into the remarkable life of Her Majesty in her own words.
I didn't have an apprenticeship. My father died much too young, and so it was all a very sudden kind of taking on and making the best job you can. It's a question of maturing into something that one's got used to doing and accepting the fact that here you are and it's your fate. It is a job for life. These 25 years have seen much change for Britain. No longer an imperial power, we have been coming to terms with what this means for ourselves and for our relations with the rest of the world. We have forged new links with other countries, and in joining the European economic communities, we have taken what is perhaps one of the most significant decisions during my reign. Developments in science, technology, and in medicine have improved the quality of life and the comfort of life. And of course, there has also been television. Clothes-wise, does it look all right with the background?
Yes, it does.
I mean, Johnny, like, it'd be awful if you said no, because I don't know something else.
Yes, I mean, it's all right, Phil, is it?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Sure.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready now.
Red and green should never be seen, but never mind.
It's not the new inventions which are the difficulty. The trouble is caused by unthinking people who carelessly throw away ageless ideals as if they were old and outworn machinery. They would have religion thrown aside, morality in personal and public life made meaningless, honesty counted as foolishness, and self-interest set up in place of self-restraint. At this critical moment in our history, we will certainly lose the trust and respect of the world if we just abandon those fundamental principles which guided the men and women who built the greatness of this country and Commonwealth.
Most people have a job and then they go home. And in this existence, the job and the life go on together because you can't really divide it up. The boxes and the communications just keep on coming. And of course, with modern communications, they come even quicker. I mean, luckily I'm a quick reader, though I do rather begrudge some of the hours that I have to do instead of being outdoors. I have had quite a lot of prime ministers, starting with Winston, and some stayed longer than others.
Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
They unburden themselves, or they tell me what's going on, or if they've got any problems. And sometimes one can help in that way, too. That's the sort of thing that happens to me when I talk in a crowd. You know. They know that one can be impartial, so to speak. I think it's rather nice to feel that one's a sort of sponge. And everybody can come and tell one things. And some things stay there, and some things go out the other ear, and some things never come out at all. One just knows about it. The dresses and coats. I would have thought for the state visit to Austria, this might be very useful. Yes, because it's got a wool coat, and in May one never knows, does one? Really? So that something like that, and that one.
The Venerable Thomas Dyson, Archdeacon of Udine.
I'm always absolutely fascinated by the people who come and all the things that they've done. I think that's very important, that the system does discover people who do unsung things, you know, and I think that's very satisfactory.
That's nice, lovely.
And I think people need pats on the back sometimes. It's a very dingy world otherwise.
That's better. Excellent. So looking around towards me. All right. Don't worry, be all right. That's fine. Good. Keep it down.
Definitive edition of the plays of J.M. Barrie. Peter Pan. He was the most wonderful storyteller.
Oh, absolutely.
As children, we used to go to tea, and he'd tell the most wonderful stories. Yes, he just happened to be the sort of person that could tell children stories. It didn't matter if you were just sitting at the tea table, you know. It was very interesting. And of course, boringly, if one was a small child, one didn't realise what a good storyteller one was listening to. If only one had known. Love that. We, as children, spoke from here at Windsor to children who had been evacuated from their homes and sent away for their own safety.
Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. We know, every one of us, that in the end all will be well, for God will care for us and give us victory and peace. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place.
When Prince Philip and I were married on this day 50 years ago, Britain had just endured 6 years of war, emerging battered but victorious. Prince Philip had served in the Royal Navy in the Far East, while I was grappling in the ATS with the complexities of the combustion engine and learning to drive an ambulance with care.
My sister and I realized we couldn't see what the crowds were enjoying. So we asked my parents if we could go out and see for ourselves. We cheered the King and Queen on the balcony and then walked miles through the streets. I remember lines of unknown people linking arms and walking down Whitehall, all of us just swept along on a tide of happiness and relief. I think it was one of the most memorable nights of my life.
There is no point in regretting the passage of time. Growing older is one of the facts of life.
and it has its own compensations. Experience should help us to take a more balanced view of events and to be more understanding about the foibles of human nature. Like everyone else, I learn about what is going on in the world from the media. But I'm fortunate to have another source of information. Every day, hundreds of letters come to my desk, and I make a point of reading as many of them as I possibly can.
I don't open all of them, obviously, because I don't have time to do that. But it does certainly give me, I suppose, because one gets perhaps even sort of a bit more remote, it gives one an idea of what is worrying people and what actually they feel that I could do to help. I think in a way one feels that there is a sort of, the buck stops here, so to speak, you know, and that I'm the one. I had a letter this morning about something, and he said, I've been going round and round in circles, but you were the only person who can stop the circle, and you will be able to fix it. I thought that was rather nice.
But there are a few letters which reflect the darker side of human nature. It is only too easy for passionate loyalty to one's own country, race, or religion, or even to one's favourite football club, to be corroded into intolerance, bigotry, and ultimately into violence. We have witnessed some frightening examples of this in recent years. All too often, intolerance creates the resentment and anger which fill the headlines and divide communities and nations and even families. The problems of progress, the complexities of modern administration, the feeling that metropolitan government is too remote from the lives of ordinary men and women. These, among other things, have helped to revive an awareness of historic national identities in these islands. They provide the background for the continuing and keen discussion of proposals for devolution to Scotland and Wales within the United Kingdom. I number kings and queens of England and of Scotland and princes of Wales among my ancestors, and so I can readily understand these aspirations. But I cannot forget that I was crowned Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It has turned out to be an annus horribilis. There can be no doubt, of course, that criticism is good for people and institutions that are part of public life. No institution, city, monarchy, whatever, should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty and support, not to mention those who don't. But we are all part of the same fabric of our national society, and that scrutiny by one part of another can be just as effective if it is made with a touch of gentleness, good humour, and understanding. This sort of questioning can also act, and it should do so, as an effective engine for change. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. Consent, or the lack of it, is expressed for you, Prime Minister, through the ballot box. It is a tough, even brutal system, but at least the message is a clear one for all to read. For us, a royal family, however, the message is often harder to read, obscured as it can be by deference, rhetoric, or the conflicting currents of public opinion.
but read it we must. Our humble and hearty thanks to all those in Britain and around the world who have welcomed us and sustained us and our family in the good times and the bad so unstintingly over many years. It is you, if I may now speak to all of you directly, who have seen us through and helped us to make our duty fun. We are deeply grateful to you, each and every one. My goodness, I've been busy.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
While we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
And that film was made by Stuart Denman. Let's talk now to historian Professor Suzannah Lipscomb and two men who at various points served among the Queen's closest aides. Earl Peel, who was her Lord Chamberlain, which means he oversaw the household and its key events until last year, and Sir William Heseltine, who joined her household right back in 1961 and eventually became her private secretary in the 1980s. Thank you very much for talking to us. Suzannah, first of all, how significant is the Queen's reign when it comes to UK history?
Well, of course, you'll be remembered for the longevity of her reign, being, in fact, the second longest reigning monarch in global history, and of course our longest reigning monarch in Britain. But of course, I think actually it's really about the fact that she presided over a really significant change in Britain's position in the world, moving from being at the head of this large empire to declining geopolitical status and decolonisation. And she had to create the blueprint for the role and nature of a constitutional monarch in those circumstances, in the face of the contraction of British power. And she did that by her personal character, her personal convictions and her personal example, as in fact had been predicted at her coronation by her Archbishop of Canterbury that she would do. And that is how she showed people how to be a monarch and brought people together. And it rests so much, I think, on her character.
Well, let's find out more about her character, because William Heseltine, one of her closest advisors from the 60s to the 90s, and she was still a young woman when you started working with her in her early 30s. How did she deal with the country changing so fast around her? William Heseltine, can you hear me? I suspect not. Let's try Earl Peel. Can you hear me, Earl Peel? I do hope you can.
I can.
Yes, thank you.
I can hear you, yes.
Thank you for talking to us. Responsible for staff and state visits for a very long time, between 2006 and 21. Tell us what she was like to work alongside.
Well, she was a complete joy to work with, but it took me some time to establish that. When I first started as Lord Chamberlain, I was degrees of reticence, and I wasn't quite sure exactly how to play the Queen. But as time went on, I became much more confident in my dealings with her, and I realised that she was somebody who loved straight talking, and she was never frightened to hear the truth. And the thing I think I liked about her most of all, I found fascinating, was there were really two sides to her character. There was the professional Queen, when she was carrying out her duties either as head of state or head of nation. And she did so in a very determined and professional fashion. And then there was the other side of the Queen, which when she relaxed and she threw her shoes off and she laughed, and she was the best company in the world.
And you were able to be honest with her, clearly, from what you've just said.
Yes, I think everybody in the household found that she liked straight talking. If there was a problem that had to be addressed, we faced it, and she was never frightened to hear the truth and to respond accordingly.
In terms of organising parts of her life and state visits, what was that like? How was she when it came to meeting presidents, prime ministers from around the world?
Well, of course, I was head of the household as a non-executive chairman, and it was up to the private secretaries to deal with the constitutional elements of her life and her programming and so forth. So although I attended the state visits and the grand receptions and so forth, I didn't see her at close hand in operation, but judging by the response when she was walking around shaking people by the hand, everybody appeared very relaxed and very confident in her presence.
Suzannah Lipscomb, how did she redefine the role of being this country's monarch?
I suppose she was dealing with moving from a position where, of course, there'd been constitutional monarchs before, from Edward the Seventh onwards, we could say, I suppose. But in this position, she had to establish what it meant to do that in the face of extraordinary change, when it looked like the monarchy was quickly going to become irrelevant, and actually it needed to move with the times. And so I think in many ways it's how she continued to operate and to meet people who she might not necessarily have liked to spend time with. She obviously had to entertain tyrants like Idi Amin and Nicolae Ceausescu at the government's behest. But I think above all, there was this sense that in her conviction of who she was as a person, that she was compassionate, that she demonstrated a sort of modesty in the way she met people, that despite coming from this position of great privilege, she made people feel at ease. And so at the heart of her monarchy was this human connection that meant that the monarch remained relevant because of the way she touched people.
We're going to try and talk again to Sir William Heseltine. I do hope you can hear me, Sir William.
Loud and clear.
You can. Good. I'm very pleased about that.
Yes, I can. Yes.
And
I didn't want to get up at this time in the morning for nothing.
No. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Forgive me. You look emotional. Is that right?
Well, it was a very sad day for me, but there was such a long and wonderful life to reflect on that it was a mixed emotion when I heard the news yesterday.
Right. Tell us about your time working alongside the Queen.
Well, I worked for her for jolly nearly 30 years, for her and with her. In the course of that time I travelled with her, lived in several of her palaces, moved around with her, had many meals with her, picnicked with her, and shared some of her sporting interests. So inevitably we got to know one another quite well.
How would you describe her then?
Sorry, what was that?
How would you describe her?
I would describe her as a truly remarkable person. She was also, I might say in rather more practical terms, an exemplary boss. Very, very wonderful person to work for.
Were you able to tell her the truth, as Earl Peel was saying he could speak the truth to her?
Well, I hope I could. I certainly did my best to tell her what I saw and what I thought of it. And certainly there was no inhibition, except the fact that you were talking to somebody very special. But I'm sure she never wanted to have the truth concealed.
How did she manage to stay the same and yet evolve the monarchy?
Well, I think she is a truly authentic person. What you see is what you get. And there was no question ever of her trying to present some sort of different public personality from the person that she was. And that authenticity, I think, always came through.
So, William, I'm just going to go back to Earl Peel for a moment, if I may. Earl Peel, given the crises she faced, you were there when the pandemic struck. You know, what was she like in the face of a crisis?
Well, she always responded positively to advice. I mean, just going back to the point I was making earlier about how she listened to what people had to say, and she, more often than not, took up recommendations that were beneficial to the well-being of the monarchy. I mean, one major decision that she agreed on quite early was the opening up of Buckingham Palace to what we call the summer opening. I mean, that was a huge infringement on her palace, but she saw the advantages of it, not just from a financial perspective, but also in terms of giving the public a chance of seeing some of the fine artifacts that exist at Buckingham Palace. And that's one example of where her practical will came into being, and she responded so positively to suggestions. But the pandemic was, that occurred towards the end of my time, but it was a challenge like no other. And really, it was a masterstroke by the master of the household, working up these flexible bubbles that where people had to dedicate their time to spending time in quarantine, so they could go forward and attend to the Queen and look after her during that difficult time.
Yes. And Sir William, how did she deal with the country changing around her when you were working alongside her from the 1960s onwards?
Well, I think she was very well aware that the monarchy had to change, but I think equally she felt that too rapid change in a period when everything was changing so drastically around her would not be the right posture to take. And so I think she felt the right posture was probably to be a little bit behind the times rather than before them. But she certainly managed to adapt very well to changing circumstances.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us, and I'm really pleased that we established the technical side of things, Sir William. We appreciate your time. Thank you. And Earl Peel, thank you very much as well for speaking to us on Newsnight, and to Suzannah Lipscomb. Thank you. Now, the unique nature of royal succession means this week has brought the immediate arrival of a new king, just as we adjust to the death of the Queen. King Charles III stepped publicly into his new role today, greeting crowds as he returned with his Queen consort to Buckingham Palace. This evening, in his first address to the nation, he paid tribute to his mother.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family. And we owe her the most heartfelt debt any family could owe to their mother, for her love, affection, guidance, understanding, and example. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today.
Let's talk now to Kirsty, who is at Balmoral. Kirsty, tell us what it's been like there today.
Well, even tonight, at this late hour, there are people coming here by the light of their iPhones to leave flowers. It's been a day of complete quietude. People have been coming here solemnly with families, with their animals, with their pets, leaving tokens of affection and respect, not staying long, but there's been a real sense. It's interesting, it's been a quite different experience watching what's happening down south, which seems to be very much about statehood now and ceremony. But here, I think it is very much about people having a great bond with the Queen and wanting to be close to her. because of course this is where she remains. So today we've had all sorts of people from all over the world, press from all over the world. There would never have been anything like this for any other head of state or indeed monarch around the world. And we've had visitors coming far and wide in Scotland, but people who are in Scotland coming from here from Las Vegas, leaving bouquets, leaving wreaths, leaving little statues of corgis. I think she really did touch many, many people. And I think here in Scotland, there is definitely a feeling of deep respect and affection, but not deference. And I think she liked that. I think she liked that about Scotland. I think she liked that people met her eye to eye. And, you know, here in Ballater, she was always out and about. She loved the informality. I think she felt very much at home here. I think this was where she was trained in statecraft by her own father at a young age. And it had a deep and abiding history because, in fact, this place was built by Prince Albert for Queen Victoria from granite from the estate. So there's a great feeling of continuity, which is incredibly important at the moment.
And tell us what happens in the coming days then.
So here tonight at Balmoral, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who's been her mother's great stay and support, Sophie, Countess of Wessex, is here. Indeed, her sons are here, and all her grandchildren, bar Harry and William. Now, they have been in very private today. It's been a day of deep sadness for them, as it has been for much of the household. But I think tomorrow, I'm not sure, but I think, look at all these wonderful flowers you can see behind us just in the light of the trees. I think there might be a coming out, I can't be sure, but I think there may be a coming out to the world again after this period, just this period of peace and tranquility and privacy. So that will happen here tomorrow. On Sunday, the Queen will be moved to Edinburgh, to Holyrood, and thence to lie in state at St Giles. And of course, because she died in Scotland, that means that St Giles is the place that she will first lie in state before she moves on to London. And I suspect that in Edinburgh we'll see that the same quietude, the same tranquility of people coming to pay their respects at St Giles Cathedral.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you. King Charles spoke this evening of the very different world into which his mother had been crowned queen. She inherited the throne as Britain and its empire emerged from the trauma of World War II, and she became a defining figure of a period in which her United Kingdom in many ways changed beyond recognition. The end of empire, the birth of the Commonwealth, shifting demographics and the surge of technological advancement. For many, the Queen was one of the few constants of the era. So how should we reflect on this second Elizabethan age? And as King Charles accedes to the throne, what might this next period of our history bring? We will talk about this with historian Simon Schama in just a moment. But first, here's our chief correspondent, David Grossman.
So close to the end of a reign of such length, defining the new Elizabethan age isn't easy or obvious. But there are some threads, even this soon, that we can begin to draw together.
The Elizabethan age is also the age of communication. What started with the UK's first mass TV event, the coronation, ended with news of Her Majesty's death. Yes, posted on the palace gates, as is tradition, but it was really spread at electric speed from phone to phone on individual screens.
Although the Queen was seldom seen with a mobile phone and only seemed to use computers for virtual audiences during the pandemic, her reign was intertwined with technological progress.
All of us here know that we are present at the making of history. It is with pride that I now open Calder Hall, Britain's first atomic power station.
She saw the birth of so many technologies and sometimes the promise of white heat disappointingly cool and darken. The age of Queen Victoria saw the rise of factories and foundries as Britain became the first and most important industrial nation. Elizabeth was born just 25 years after Victoria's death. But their reigns couldn't have been more different. Those factories and industries that the Victorians built declined and disappeared. Her subjects found new ways of earning their living, an explosion of retail and services and offices. As the pits and steelworks and shipyards closed, the new power that propelled the age forward was culture, music and film and literature. Britain sold itself to the world as modern and swinging. This was increasingly an age where talent was supposed to trump class and breeding. We began to talk about social mobility, the grammar schools and new universities creating a new elite. But not everyone was convinced the peaks were really open to all. The Queen was a working woman when few women worked. Over the decades that has changed. She saw firsthand as women rose to unprecedented heights.
Perhaps the biggest change is in us, the UK population. Not only are there far more of us now, nearly 20 million more than in 1952, but we also look and sound very different.
Britain became multiracial, and from conformity of dress and attitudes, more individualistic and less deferential. The new Elizabethans, recently emerged from the horror of the Second World War, saw the future as a more connected world, barriers coming down, understanding going up. The new king takes the throne as the UK and the world emerges from another horror, the pandemic. That more connected future, with its promise of peace and prosperity, though, now looks far less certain.
David Grossman, let's reflect on the passing of that age and on the new one that we're entering into with historian Simon Schama. Also, the former High Commissioner of Barbados, Guy Hewitt, and campaigner Esther Rantzen. Welcome to Newsnight, all of you. Simon Schama, this transition from Queen to King Charles III, how important is it for the monarchy and its survival that they get this right?
Oh, it's incredibly important, really. The Queen was such a success at doing something which is unbelievably tricky. Namely, you have to be both familiar and remote at the same time. You have to preserve the kind of mystery and the magic, but you need to be seen being at ease with the people, which the Queen was, very good at until she wasn't occasionally, only twice, famously, those 8 days after the Aberfan disaster, and even more notoriously, not getting to London after the death of Diana. So, but other than that, she had extraordinary intuitive emotional intelligence for regular people, for ordinary people. Constitutional monarchy is a funny thing, I think, Victoria, because it has to pull off this sense of ceremoniousness and empathy at the same time. Very hard to do that. But as the world becomes more poisoned by the abrasiveness of politics, people want a space to say we belong to the nation, we belong to a community, and we can go somewhere which is not, dedicated to mutual ideological or actual extermination. We can be, this is a place bathed in the affection for the monarchy, where the monarch doesn't belong to a party. So what has to happen in the transition is so tricky, because he has to sustain the sense of the country as a family, and with his own family, which has had its own rocky history and still does with Harry and Meghan, and at the same time, embody all that history, all that tradition, all that ritual. He made, I thought, an incredibly impressive speech that was televised to St Paul's, because he did it, as he said, as a father and a son.
And we'll talk more about the address in a moment, if we may. Esther Rantzen, a really straightforward question. What was your emotional response when you heard the news of the death of the Queen?
Is that addressed to me?
Esther, it was to you. Yes, it was.
Victoria,
yes.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right.
So sorry. The sound's not very good. Well, I think I found myself unexpectedly in tears. I think an awful lot of people felt that way. But one aspect of the Queen's contribution throughout her life, which I don't think has been properly assessed, is to the voluntary sector, to the charities. I often think the royal family is underestimated for the impact they have when they attend an event. If they're fundraising, if a charity is fundraising, you can sell out, you can sell all your tickets, provided you've got a member of the royal family there. And if you'll pardon me pointing this out, over my shoulder there is one of my favourite photographs of the Queen attending a charity, I believe it was for homeless young people. And they'd been very careful to put barriers so that you were exactly in the pen where you were supposed to be. And one of the chief executives began to leap like a gazelle over the barriers, which caused the Queen to roar with laughter. And I just loved seeing her laugh like that, and also appreciated so much the fact that because she was there, the charity got publicity, the charity got money. It made a huge difference.
Guy Hewitt, you supported the removal of the Queen as head of state, as I understand it.
Well, in a sense, speaking in my role, my previous role as High Commissioner for Barbados,
yes,
the pursuit of self-determination of our nation, having a citizen as our head of state, I think was an important journey for Barbados, as it has been for a number of countries within the Commonwealth.
Yeah. But I understand you do think the Queen was good for the Commonwealth.
The Queen has been remarkable for the Commonwealth, and I have paid tribute to her in the past, actually previously on Newsnight, because unlike other colonial powers that held on to this European arrogance, the Queen was able to transition easily from being a monarch and a sovereign of these nations to becoming a peer to newly emerging heads of state from around the Commonwealth. And I think that was remarkable and crucial to keeping the Commonwealth together. Her visit to Ghana in the early 60s was, I think, a watershed for the Commonwealth, and it was her role and her decisiveness at that time that really showed her leadership and her commitment to this Commonwealth of family of nations.
Simon Schama, what will the monarchy be like under King Charles III?
Well, I think it's probably going to have to slim down a little. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it'd be surprising. I mean, that's been spoken of really as a reform he's likely to subscribe to. Not all the royals may be on, you know, the public budget anymore. I don't know, but actually, I think in some sense, actually, a kind of core monarchy of King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla and William and Catherine and so on, and their children probably, you know, will serve it very well. On the other hand, the one thing, of course, actually, which is so startlingly different from when the Queen came to the throne, nobody knew what the Queen, if she had no ideas about anything, really, and she may not have known what idea she had exactly. Her father died so young, except exceptionally traditional ideas, and that both her father and her uncle never wanted to be king. Charles, on the other hand, everybody knows what his ideas are, but the central one, the fate of the earth, climate change, has been an obsession of his, a good, benevolent obsession, 30, 40 years or so. So whether or not he's quite able to be so tight-lipped as his constitutional norms dictate he should is the moot point. My own feeling is that actually he'll do best when he is completely himself, which isn't to say he'll go on a roar supporting this or that party or opposing this. He won't do that. But the Queen, I think, is often...
But he can't be completely himself, can he? Let me bring in Esther, if I may. Esther, I'm just coming back to you. I mean, do you think he can, you know, can he achieve the kind of respect that the Queen achieved over many years?
The sound is so bad, Victoria, I can barely hear what you said to me. Would you mind asking me that question again? So sorry.
No, that's all right. Is Charles going to be as popular as his mum?
Oh, right, yes. Well, I think I was listening to Simon Chalmers talking about slimmed down royalty, and I think we need them. I mean, if you take the Countess of Wessex, Sophie Wessex, who is the president of the NSPCC and Childline, she contributes so much. There are so many other things that really we depend upon. Quite a wide royal family for their, as I say, their contribution to the voluntary sector. One of the last times I met the Queen, it was in 2011, actually.
I'm going to have to ask you to be brief,
I hadn't realised
Esther.
that she was... Right. I won't tell you about how she helped me set up the Silver Line, but she was terrific.
Was she? Well, I'm glad to hear that. Guy Hewitt, very briefly, the Commonwealth under King Charles III, what does he have to do to make sure the Commonwealth survives?
As Simon said, he brings a lot of the values that the Commonwealth are concerned about: climate change, small states, sustainable development, but also he provides the continuity from Her Majesty, and that was an important decision when the heads decided that he would succeed her. And I think he will have his own style of his own reign, but I think he's going to do it magnificently well. I think I have every confidence. He has had a long time to prepare for this role. He has his ideas, but I think they are what the 21st century needs.
Okay. Thank you, all of you. Esther, thank you so much for bearing with us with the delay on the line. We do appreciate it. Esther Rantzen, Guy Hewitt and Simon Schama, thank you for coming in. That's all from us tonight. Next week, Newsnight will be broadcasting special programmes from across the 4 nations of the UK as the period of official mourning continues. On Monday, Kirsty will be in Edinburgh. Tonight, we're going to leave you with some final words from the Queen, delivered to the nation 65 years ago during her first televised Christmas speech. Good night.
In the old days, the monarch led his soldiers on the battlefield, and his leadership at all times was close and personal. Today, things are very different. I cannot lead you into battle. I do not give you laws or administer justice. But I can do something else. I can give you my heart and my devotion to these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations.